Welcome to This is ADHD. I'm your host, Chris Johnson. I was late diagnosed with ADHD. I'm a senior leader and a personal change coach, working with people that want to change their lives for the better. In my coaching work, I work with people to understand what is getting in the way of making those changes and how they can not only get what they want, but also feel good whilst doing it. I use those same skills in This is ADHD, but instead of having multiple sessions, we do it over a single session, and we use it to have a real conversation about what it's like to have ADHD. The conversations in This is ADHD are about putting a face to the name, label, or diagnosis of ADHD, and showing that ADHD cannot be described in a single conversation with a single person. And so whilst my ADHD is almost definitely different to yours, both of us are still valid. In today's episode, I'm joined by a previous guest. Amy Wilkinson from episode 4 has brought back her partner Barry, and we're talking about what it's like when both people in a relationship have ADHD. The content warnings for this episode include relationship challenges and conflicts, medication, and anxiety. So grab a hot drink, sit back, and let's get into the conversation. And today I am joined by a familiar face, Amy. Welcome back. Amy came on episode 4 for talking about imposter syndrome, and Amy is not alone. Amy has brought in her partner Barry. Hi, Barry.
Hello.
Barry is an operations manager, a town councillor, and the resident Star Wars expert. How are you both doing?
We're good, thank you. This is Barry's first ever podcast, so how are you feeling?
It's exciting.
Yeah, a little bit nervous. My cheeks are the same colour as your jumper. I'm sure they're going.
I mean, it's all about lighting, right? It's all about lighting.
I know we've got terrible lighting in here, but hey.
It's all good. So Barry, Amy's already answered this question, but I'm going to ask you, what do you call your ADHD?
I don't really have a specific name for it, but I've always, since I've been diagnosed, called it my special brain, which works well with our daughter as well, because we talk about our special brains and how they can do amazing things. Special, not different, is the important thing. So.
Special and different.
Sorry, is it special and different or special not different? That's
different.
Yeah, I think special is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, I've got terrible connotations of like the things that. Well, I'm not even going to say it because it's so awful. But like the things that we used to say about the special kids at school. But you know what I mean. I think it's that super brain thing, isn't it? But yeah, I think
it works in different ways and does amazing things.
And it shows up for you quite differently to how it shows up for me, doesn't it?
Yes.
Are we saying that ADHD is different in people?
Totally. It's totally different. So I would say for me, well, just thinking about us as a couple, I am messy. I've got the stereotypical like messy, forgetful. You're not like that at all, are you?
No, I like order and process and structure, and I'm not going to lie, it sometimes does my head in when Amy leaves stuff all over the place. Generally trainers at the moment.
I've got quite a lot of trainers. I don't leave my keys. You lose your keys. So we're both very good at losing things. But Barry, this is where it's been really interesting for us, like finding all that about ADHD and stuff, and both late diagnosed, is how it is that we're different. Like we are both special in whatever way you want to say it. And that's where I've sort of got the problem with the word special. But it shows up differently. And actually, if you sat down and kind of went through the list of traits, yes, we've got some overlap, but there's some stuff that's really different as well, isn't there?
Yeah, mine manifests itself more, and it would have been what would have been ADD rather than ADHD, but obviously that's not what it's called nowadays, because I don't show any signs of hyperactivity. It's all kind of internal noise for me. And
yeah. So you were when you were diagnosed, you didn't have the hyperactivity in your diagnosis, did you? Whereas I never stopped talking, so I think the hyperactivity shows a little bit more.
Yeah, on my diagnosis, I only just about reached the benchmark for hyperactivity. Everything else was off the scale. But
so, are you hyperactive and inattentive, or are you both combined? Sorry.
No. So I'm not hyperactive at all. So apart from internally, that showed no signs currently or in my childhood or anything of hyperactivity.
I'm combined. I got it all. But interestingly, again, I think yes, I have been diagnosed as having hyperactivity as well, but it wouldn't show in the classic sense. It didn't show in the classic sense as I was growing up because I learned to internalize everything. Whereas, so it wasn't the typical. I mean, like our daughter, she shows it, like she jumps up and down and she's upside down and she's all of those things. And I probably was when I was her age, but you learn to internalize that. So I think people were quite surprised to hear that I'm hyperactive, apart from the people that used to go clubbing with me because they that surprised.
Yeah, I was always the quiet one in school, the one who was shy and wouldn't say anything, but also not paying attention at all. My mum's just found all my old school reports from age 8 to 18, and almost without exception, every single one says could achieve so much more if paid attention more or focused or put a bit more effort in. Who knew, eh?
Right. I think inattentiveness in boys is so... Sorry. I was going to say inattentiveness in boys especially is so underdiagnosed. I think there's that thing of ADHD in boys is always seen as hyperactive, and in girls it's always seen as inattentive, and unsurprisingly that's not true.
Yeah, and actually we're probably showing the opposite sides of it. I mean, I've got the inattentive bit as well, but for you as a child, you were a daydreamer, but you also had a really vivid imagination, didn't you? Like you created a whole different world that you lived in, and
kind of almost an alter ego of this person who, not that I wanted to be, but I actually was in my head. So lived in a different place and had different cars and different things. So that's the way I dealt with it for many years.
And how was it when you kind of got together? Because there's this thing of, I don't know if you've heard the term neurohuddle, where people kind of flock together because they kind of inherently recognize the differences in each other. Did you how did you kind of come together?
Well, we came together because we swiped right on Tinder. But I think that's a really interesting point because, like, it was the first relationship that I'd got into where it was with somebody that was a bit different. Like, this is where I had words like different and special. It's like, that sound offensive, but like not my usual type. But instantly we were properly intense, weren't we? From like, even before we met, like the first day we started WhatsApping. I mean, I can't tell me I'm not employed there anymore, but it was between Christmas and New Year, wasn't I? I didn't do any work that day. I had to sit in the plug because we were WhatsApping each other so much that my phone kept running out of battery. But it was like that for months, wasn't it? Like as soon as we woke up, we were messaging each other, and we lived quite a long way away from each other, but we were in constant contact, weren't we?
Yeah, we moved in properly officially after 8 months, but for those first 8 months we sent about 70,000 WhatsApps between each other, so it's quite intense.
Yeah, and it was intense, and that feeling like this is somebody that sees the soul in me in a way that I'd never had that in a relationship before.
No, and I was able to share things with you that I hadn't shared with anybody else, and felt that I could be open and honest and could say things without judgment, which was the first for me. So
yeah, and that like obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? So like we're saying this now because we've been through everything we've been through and we've both got these diagnoses, but the stuff that Barry was telling me, like to a lot of people, would have been red flags because they were, you know, things that were reckless behaviour and, you know, stuff that we will not talk about on this podcast that happened in his past. And a lot of women or partners would have run a mile, and I kind of lent into it. And because I think I knew at his very core he was a very like a lovely person, you know, like a kind, loving person, which is not something I'd had before. But he's looking at me like, oh, it's a nice thing. It'd be nice. Not very nice.
she doesn't. Yeah, she doesn't say these things to me normally.
No, of course not.
Not for you. But you know, it was. I realised my brain just went then. I went into my inattentive. I'm like, what am I talking about? But yeah, so I think for me, because I'd only had like 2 maybe like proper other relationships. I'd had a marriage before that and then another longer relationship in my 20s, whereas your relationship history was quite
the opposite. So I didn't have my first proper girlfriend, if you want to call it that, until I was 19, and we got married. I was married at 24, separated at 25, divorced at 26, so well done me. But pretty much every relationship after then was a year, 18 months, almost without exception. I just had this progression of intense relationships that kind of
blew themselves out.
Yeah, satisfy the dopamine hit quite quickly.
Yeah.
But then after a while,
just get bored.
Not so much,
yeah, just get bored. It's funny actually because one of the other reasons when I was like, oh yeah, he might be the one for me, was he was the only person I'd ever met that was married for less time than I was. So I made it to 20 and you didn't quite make it to 12, did you?
Yeah, 363 days.
So it felt different, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about, is like we didn't know it at the time, and I can see it in my friends. Like I know, like I've got a lot of friends that are getting diagnosed with ADHD or show signs of ADHD, but we didn't know that's why we were attracted to each other then. And I'd say, you know, it's been part of the reason we were attracted to each other, but it's also part of the reason we really annoy each other a lot of the time as well.
Cool. And I just want to ask as well, Barry, what was different for you when you started talking to Amy to other relationships as well? Because I've heard it from Amy's side, and I just want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think I kind of briefly touched on it then, but I just instantly felt this ability to have no filter, to be open and honest and share things with her that I hadn't shared with other people. And she knows more than anyone else about me, almost more than myself sometimes.
That would be the coaching me.
But Amy had started the counselling way before and gone down that journey and kind of looking into herself and working out who she is. I had touched on it over the years, bits and bobs, but hadn't even scratched the surface. And I started 2020 was my first proper journey into discovering myself. So yeah.
Which, if we're honest, was back because of an ultimatum from me. And I think, I know, Chris, that I'm going to talk more than Barry, but it's because he's nervous. I can't. And do you know what? He doesn't stop talking when it's like we're with friends. He doesn't stop talking. But I think I said about that being able to see the good in him. I think other people would just have seen the surface behaviour, some of the frankly dickish things that you've done over the years, it's all the classic ADHD stuff, drink a bit too much, impulsive spending, all of that sort of stuff. I do the same things. I eat impulsively and buy trainers. But I think the difference for both of us was, I think that there was just this deep connection where we knew that it wasn't like neither of us were doing it doing anything annoying or whatever to hurt one another. So, and I think that's why why you didn't get bored after 18 months.
Yeah. And as Amy said, that we've been together nearly 8 years now, but I have done a few dickish things. But I think Amy's recognised that the things I do aren't meant to hurt her. They're just they've happened because that's the way my brain is wired.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, at the time, it doesn't feel like that. Like, it's like, you've hurt me. And, basically we got to a stage, and this is all like basically how we've ended up both getting this diagnosis was because of those moments. And because of COVID, COVID was hard on most people's relationships. I mean, I was quite lucky. He was a key worker who was never at home. But you were it was a very intense time, wasn't it? And we had a small child and all of that sort of stuff. And we did get to the point where I was like, because I know he doesn't do those things deliberately, but I still have that fear that he's going to do those things. So we talked about it as it's the 5%. There's always the 5% of me looking over my shoulder, and there's because we've done a lot of work on ourselves, and together we went to relationship counselling together. I can recognise now when that's happening, because he gets really inattentive. So it's totally, when the phone is this way up and he's playing games on his phone all the time, because I'm like, you can't tell me you're reading the news because you've got it that way up. Or there's behaviours that I can start to see that's like, you're in the spiral and you don't know you're in the spiral. I need to say something to you because you might go and do something stupid, which might just be something as stupid as simple as going out and getting really, really drunk with your mates, or it could be something worse. And it's always the worrying about the something worse bit that triggered us to then go to relationship counselling, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I'd been at I've been to counselling solo counselling for a couple of years, from middle of 2020 through to kind of spring last year, and that's at that point we thought, well, let's move things on. Let's do it together.
He wasn't working hard enough.
Yeah,
his counsellor wasn't pushing him enough, basically.
Yeah, we got to the point where at the beginning I was getting a lot out of it, but at the end of it, we were always just having a chat.
Yeah, you weren't being challenged, were you, to change anything? And
the relationship counsellor, although we only went half a dozen times, then something came out that, again, I'd been dickish. And so she gave a bit of advice and said, well, maybe you should try this. So that's when I first sought the help of a psychologist.
Yeah.
So kind of the next step up, as it were, to really dig deep down into what was the root cause of who I am and what I did, and the reasons for it. And within half an hour of my first psychologist session, he said, have you ever considered you might have ADHD?
And it was like, oh, right. And we had already started to have those conversations, hadn't we? And in the relationship counselling, I was like, part of what I was saying was, I know he's not a bad person. There's something wired wrong in his brain when he goes and does these stupid things. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not blaming everything on Barry. Like, I'm just saying that. But this is how it happened. And we'd done the online tests and stuff, haven't we? Because of like my, I've already shared my diagnosis story, but because I was starting to get more and more aware of it because of the clients I was working with and stuff, and because of our daughter being a maniac that jumps around constantly, home, not at school, obviously. I
was just looking back at WhatsApp messages and things. The first reference to ADHD is April last year between us.
Right, okay.
And I first made contact with a psychologist in May, but wasn't able to see him due to a waiting list until July. So but then things progressed quite quickly, and that's when I started down my diagnosis route through the NHS. Didn't get very far. Bupa didn't get very far, and ultimately just paid for it through ADHD 360.
But then the next day got your NHS referral, so that was a bit frustrating. But that was quite interesting, because the whole system is a bit weird, isn't it? Because a psychologist had said, "I'm pretty sure you've got it." Then you got Bupa would pay for you to be assessed to see if you needed an assessment, but wouldn't pay for the assessment. So another an hour on the phone to another specialist who spoke to me, didn't he? I had a bit of time on the phone to him.
And he said, yes, there's a very strong chance about ADHD.
But you still can't, you still have to go through all of the other hoops.
So I submitted both of those reports to the NHS, who sent it off to the Lincolnshire mental health assessment thing, and said I don't meet the criteria for funding through the NHS. And Bupa also said, yes, you've got a diagnosis pretty much, but we're not going to fund it either. So,
and then that's when you went private, but then another GP saw how ridiculous it was and put it back through, didn't she? So,
but by this time, I paid for ADHD 360. There was a longer waiting list back then. It was 6 to 8 weeks. So March this year. So come beginning of May, had my diagnosis. Yep.
May the 4th.
A big day for me. So
Barry, say why it's a big day, Barry.
Yeah, so it was kind of a big day for me, kind of for my past and for my future. So with the diagnosis of ADHD, which explained a lot of what happened in the past, but I also was elected as a town councillor in Stamford, where we live. So that was looking forward as well. So,
and a proper grown-up thing that somebody with ADHD could possibly do, right?
Yeah, quite an epic day, really. And it's like, this is good. Yeah.
You did say it was like a chapter, sort of one chapter closing and another one opening of like grown up at 49.
Absolutely, yeah. It was, it made me realise that everything that happened in the past was happening for a reason, and it wasn't just because I was reckless or whatever it was. But there's a reason behind it. It doesn't excuse some of the things I've done, but there is an explanation behind it, which made a massive difference for me.
Yeah.
But then I hadn't made a decision when I had my diagnosis whether I was going to go down the medication route or just continue counselling. Chatted through with Amy overnight and went back to them and said, yes, I'd like to go down the medication route. But on that very day, NHS came up trumps and said, we're going to fund it for you. So
so that's great. Quite good for you, hasn't it? I mean, not so great at the minute because you can't get hold of the drugs, but it has been a game check. Like, I think we'll talk about how things have changed for both of us since diagnosis, but I instantly saw a difference in Barry. Just the phone, was not like this all the time. It's gone back a bit now because of the medication shortage, but you just were calmer, weren't you?
Yeah, calmer. There was one of the reasons the goals I was looking at for my diagnosis and the medication was to cut down on the internal noise. My brain was running at 100 miles an hour, but now I'm just so much calmer. It's great.
He still isn't calm all the time, and he still gets annoyed with me leaving a mess around the house.
I don't think that's ever going to go away. Whether I had ADHD or not, that was never going to change.
So what was it like to... I think I'm going to ask Barry first, and I'm going to ask you, Amy, as well. What was it like to live with your other half undiagnosed?
It was probably a little bit more frantic, wasn't it? You talked about being disorganised, but we're both a little bit in that respect. Although we were massively hyper focused on each other,
that went away, didn't it? That did go away. I mean, that's normal, isn't it? Right, that goes away in a relationship anyway. But
we were together. We got together at the beginning of 2016 and decided quite quickly that, although before we didn't want kids, I've got an older son, but we didn't want kids with our previous partners. But as soon as we got together, quite quickly we decided we wanted a child. So within less than 2.5 years, our daughter was born. So that added another thing to not complicate the relationship, but just
another layer of franticness, isn't it? It's not easy.
Yeah, and we were both busy people. You were busy at work, I was busy at work, busy brains, and then having a child at you were, well, just turned 40. I was, just coming up 45, 44 even.
Yeah.
So it's, relatively old parents. So all of these things thrown into the melting pot made it challenging.
Yeah.
And you, Amy, how is it living with someone who is inattentive?
So I think, like for me, frantic's like normal, so that's fine. I think the inattentive thing, from a relationship point of view, was hard because, well, it can be hard because he can be. I always, like I said this last time, I always think when we say these things, they're just like human things that happen to like neurotypicals too, but it's just more intense. Like he can be very distracted on his phone. And it used to really upset me and make me feel, if you think about how intense we were in the relationship to start with, then like over time, because it's like the phone's more interesting than me, is how it felt. Good old rejection sensitivity dysphoria telling me that that's what's going on. And again, I feel like people that are neurotypical that are watching are like, that's just because he's a man, like not feeling like he was listening to me when I was talking, and those sorts of things were particularly frustrating. But I think the biggest thing for me was always that 5% that I talked about. So, and I think what's changed now is that the 5% is still there, but I can talk about the 5%. And we can have a grown-up conversation about, I'm worried, you're showing these signs. And we never really argued because I'd just say something and he'd walk out. That's his.
Damn, he's right. Yeah.
Although, can I tell the story of you walking out of the house? It wasn't actually that long ago. Yes.
Yeah, go on.
So it was one of those, because Barry does struggle with rejection sensitivity. Like the tiniest criticism, like the dishwasher's not been put on, or whatever, and he's like that. So I have to be really like, I've learned how to be assertive in a way that doesn't annoy him and whatever. But one day,
it's really annoying living with a coach.
Anyway, skirting over that. And it was something to do with Holly. So that's the thing. That's our daughter. That's when I can get really triggered and not really think things through before I say them. And I shouted at him about how he'd parented her in the moment. And he just was like, I'm not listening to this. Stormed out of the house.
Which I've never done, actually.
No,
it's the only time I've done it.
No. But the thing was, he had a face full of face paint because our daughter had just face painted. So it wasn't even like they were done properly. She'd done them on him. And he came back 20 minutes later and I was just sat in the garden, like having a cup of tea, chilling, like, deciding that I was going to like calm my nervous system down. I wasn't going to let it bother me. And like he came in and he's like, oh, sorry, I overreacted. And we just burst out laughing. I was like, what did you do? Where did you go with those face paints on? He was like, I had to go and sit in the car for 20 minutes. I just had visions of the new town councillor in Stamford walking around with face paints all over.
I'd have probably just gone to the pub or something and had a drink, but it's like, I can't do that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a good thing that you didn't do that. But I
at
guess
least you kept your presence of mind, Barry, of like remembered that you had it on their face, because I wouldn't have.
Imagine turn up in the pub with that on your face. So I think, that was a long-winded answer. Who knew that you're going to get a long-winded answer from me? I think for me, it's that those two things it's the sometimes having to tread on eggshells because of his rejection sensitivity. And this feels like a therapy session. I don't really know that this till I'm saying it out loud. And also the 5%, the constant, just keeping an eye out to make sure he's not going to do something stupid.
The difference for me is, and we've talked about it, I feel grown up, and which is ridiculous. I'm 49 and a half. I'm 50 next year. And I finally feel like I'm an adult, which is, I've never got to that point. This is my longest relationship, both my longest relationships. Obviously, my chain of year-long, 18-month relationships, but we've lived together for 7 years, and we're able to talk about things that grown-ups do.
I can remember even before you got the diagnosis, I was sitting down and I think it was when COVID hit, and we had to like put together a plan of what we were going to do, like childcare wise and whatever. And I can remember him saying to me, "Oh, this feels really good. Like it's like we're being like proper grown-ups because we've got a plan, like because we never have a plan on anything." And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? We've both had executive dysfunction, but not been able to give it a name, and that's not feeling like a grown-up, right?
Yeah, one of the best things for me is that I've now look into the future because of the disruption in my life from the relationships and other things that have caused chaos. I haven't been able to plan or think about 20 years' time, and even through the dickish things I've done over the years that we've been together, I've always had that focus of being able to look to the future of us retiring together. So that end goal has been, been great for me. So.
And I would say, if I'm completely honest, if it wasn't for the diagnosis and understanding each other better, I wouldn't have had that, because I was getting to the point of the dickishness was overtaking. Poor battery, it's not using that much ridiculously. But it wasn't often, like we're talking once a year or something, there'd just be something.
Maybe once every 18 months.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. We need to work it out. I guess that might be the cycle, that you always sabotage your relationships in the past, and you basically trying to do the same with me, but I'm still here and you can't get rid of me.
18 months since the last one.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Just
right.
be aware.
Okay. Right.
You don't have to be aware, it's fine.
See, that 5%'s just gone up to 10%. But I think, for me, I can remember having that conversation with the relationship explained in some way, otherwise I'm off, kind of thing, because I can't live like this. Whereas now, we're much more tolerant of each other. We still annoy each other, but we can just accept the differences a lot more than we did before. And I think the other thing that we've done is and the relationship counsellor helped us do this even before we had the diagnosis, is put systems in place that help us. So we'd be sat there going, well, he never knows when he's picking up, and tea and doesn't get done, and blah, 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 blah. And she would just help us with the executive function that we didn't know that was missing in our relationship. So it's really simple things like now, like we have a whiteboard that's got who's doing drop-off and pick-ups, what we're having for dinner, and
any events that will change that. So.
And we sit down every week and we go through that, and we're, it's, stuff that would help any humans, but particularly because we were so frantic and all over the place, it's really, really helped us.
It's important for me because I thrive on order and process and structure.
Yawn.
Yeah, but to have we put events into each other's diary to make sure that they pop up and we know what we're doing, as well as the whiteboard, so we know what each other's doing at any one point, as it were, and that's important to keep my brain focused.
Yeah, and I think it's become even more important for us since our daughter started school, because anyone that's got kids at school knows that, like, the level of communications that you get and having to know what's got to be where, when, and what uniform they've got to be wearing and all of that stuff, that was next level difficult for us. But
it seems to work, doesn't it?
We're getting there.
Could I propose a theory, and you can tell me if it's true or not for you? So I think there's something about the behaviours pre and post diagnosis don't change, because they are the behaviours, but there's that thing of having an assumption that there is a motivation behind those behaviours, that there's a dickishness in someone to cause those behaviours. And I think there's that thing of, if you have an understanding of it's a behaviour, it's not a motivation, it makes it much easier to have the conversation because it's not emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's the I'm not trying to be like that. It doesn't. It just takes some of the fire out of it, doesn't it? That feeling like I was saying, I felt like he was deliberately doing things to upset me and hurt me. And I know now for a fact ish.
95%, yeah.
95%, that is the case.
It stops the finger pointing, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah.
This is all your fault. This is all your fault.
Yeah.
Because there's a level of compassion between us where we realise we sometimes do things and it's not our fault.
Yeah. What I would say is there was a 2-month lag between Barry being diagnosed and me being diagnosed, and I wasn't sure I was going to get a diagnosis when he did. And there was I think on the podcast I did with you before, Chris, I called it FOMO, and I think that was doing myself a disservice. It's not FOMO who wants to have a diagnosis, but there were moments where he would say things like, well, I can't help it because I'm an ADHD. No, we're not having that. We're not having that. We're not having using ADHD as an excuse. And we did have a big row on holiday, didn't we? Because, and we do not row, because our suitcase got stolen and Barry stupidly had his meds in there. I had ours, and I had mine in the other luggage. But he couldn't take the meds, and I think once you'd taken them and felt so much better, to have them taken away was really, really hard. And I can remember like shouting at him, going, "You've not taken them for 49 years. You can't use that as an excuse now."
But the thing is, once you've had them, and you realise the difference they make to the calmness and the focus and all of that, when it's suddenly ripped away from you, it's hard. Like a real struggle.
Well, and I get that now because it happened to me, didn't it? Because I had to stop taking them because of blood pressure for a couple of weeks, and I was like wanting to kill everybody.
Yeah, she was lovely to live with during those 4.
But do you know, like, I think a lot of what we're talking about is we've just got that. It's empathy and understanding, isn't it? That we didn't have. We did have before, but we didn't have a reason for it. We just thought we were lovable dicks.
You more lovable, me more of a dick.
I didn't want to take it.
I did have a question, and it's gone. The joys of ADHD. Oh, what was it? It's completely gone, and it was a really good question. That was it. Was it. So, pre and post diagnosis, what were the situations that were... Well, no, actually, let me start again. It feels like there was unresolved conflict pre-diagnosis of saying, like, this is an issue for me and it's an emotional issue and we're not going to talk about it. And having the tools to kind of say, actually, this is an ADHD thing, or this is a me thing, or this is a thing, it enables you to have that conversation adult to adult.
Yeah. I think the diagnosis has helped that, but I think the therapy's helped that more.
Yeah, I think moving to the next level when I started seeing the psychologist, that made a difference. The counselling was good because it enabled me to start the journey and to talk about everything, which I hadn't ever done. And when I started, I was 46, 47.
Yeah.
But then to have the discussions with the psychologist takes it to a different level, and he challenged me a lot more. It then enabled me to talk about things with you more openly.
Yeah, and because I think actually, you know, like Barry said, I started that journey probably 10, 12 years ago now. I was always the one having to do that and make the effort to make the conversation adult, and then he'd storm out of the house or what. No, you only did it that once, and that was quite recent.
You just send me links of things, articles to read and things to do, and it's like, well, I need to get... Yeah, I used to get annoyed at that because this needed to be my way of doing it, and I was forced down it because of my dickish behaviour. But it's my journey, which is the important thing. I was able to take ownership of it and move it forward.
But you're more open to those things now. So it took, like, when we were going towards the ADHD diagnosis, and like Barry was on the waiting list and stuff, and then eventually I just said to him, look, let's pay for it. You know, we're in the privileged position that we can afford to pay for it. Let's do it, because it was always like, once I get the diagnosis, and like Barry wouldn't like I was already fully absorbed in ADHD podcasts and stuff, because I found them helpful, and I'd be sending them to him because I wanted to help him. But it has to be, like he says, it has to be your own journey, and you have to learn that stuff yourself, in your own way. But now you're much more accepting. Like if I send you an ADHD podcast,
well, I don't have a choice. You send me 12 reels a day on ADHD.
You send them to me too. You send them to me. So I can't remember what the question was now. It was, has it changed? What was the question?
So it was about having conflict and removing the emotion.
Yeah, that one of conflict. I think
it doesn't affect the relationship really. We are where we are, and things have happened, but it's all about the present and the future, I think. More
but I think that adult to adult conversation thing, which is, it's something we learn about as an Icarus and coach training. I think it was always me feeling like I was making the effort to walk on eggshells around him and make that happen, whereas I think now you do that too. Like you can not automatically get on the defensive if we're trying to have a constructive conversation.
Being a grown-up's quite cool, really. I've discovered it's taken a while from there.
Please don't let them take all the medication away. I'm
just thinking, like, relationships are difficult and messy as well. And we've talked about RSD. I don't know if you know about ODD and if that's kind of showed up anywhere. Objection. I'm going to get it wrong now. What is it? Essentially, it's oppositional defiance disorder. And so there's an episode coming out on it soon. Okay. And it's about when someone makes a suggestion or challenges or asks something, and the immediate response is no. And apparently this only happens in children. However...
Yeah, but he's only just grown up.
But the interesting thing is we're challenging, we're talking about me only just being grown up at 48 and all of these things. 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been
really defensive about it.
The RSD would have gone bing, 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 and I'd have walked out of the room or something, whereas now I'm quite calm and I've just taken a drug, which helped.
It isn't just the drugs, though. I think and that's the thing, because I don't want people listening to think, well, you have to be medicated, because I don't think it is about that. I think that helps. I think that helps us both be calmer, but I think it's the acceptance and the willingness to talk about it that makes the difference. But yeah, he totally would have been. If I'd even tried, well, you wouldn't have even considered coming on a podcast and talking about it. Like, this is a big thing for you to do that.
Yeah, that way, but in the past, the triggers would have been hit, and I'd have,
Well, yeah, even if it sent you a link to something, you'd be like, no, I'm not gonna. Or he'd like, and I'd just get so frustrated because like he'd had a 45-minute commute to work, and I'd be like, imagine how many useful podcasts you could listen to in that time. And he's listening to Formula One podcasts. Like, how is that useful to anybody in the world?
But also, like, I'm aware of my own driving habits of going, like, you leave the house, you get to work, and you've got no idea how you got there.
Yeah. Well, there's been quite a lot of tyres replaced on your car, so I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I've done the stereotypical thing of getting on the M25 and realise after 3 junctions I'm going the wrong way. This is way back. This is like 10, 15 years ago. I've been to my nan's and left to say goodbye. Went the wrong way, 20 miles without even realising it.
I did it yesterday. Where was I? I pulled out of a junction and I'm like, I mean, it's just like in town, so it didn't matter, but I was just like, I'm going in the wrong direction. Like, I'd obviously just gone into autopilot. So, yeah, that's my incentive, I think.
Yeah. And I think there's a question that I want to ask, which is probably not on what we've talked about before, but I think it's useful for the people that might be listening as well. And one of the fears people have about medication and hesitancy is that it's going to take away and kind of dull things down. How does it turn up for you?
you talk first?
Yeah, so well, we've discussed already. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go down the medication route, and we chatted about it. I thought, well, with the medication that you get for ADHD, they're generally quick working, but they're out of your system quickly. So if it didn't work, it's not going to be an issue. So I thought, well, let's do this. The medication started, and literally that same day that I started taking them, it's like, oh, hello, this is nice, this is calm. But it also created for me a massive hyper focus. So in my previous job, I was quite spreadsheet heavy, and but I could easily get distracted. We worked in an open office, so there was always distraction. And because I've been there 8 or 9 years, and I was one of the most experienced people in the business, so people would always come to me, can I just borrow you for 5 minutes? Multiple times a day. So distraction is kind of, they talk about you may as well be drunk if you've been distracted from the task you're doing. It's like you've had 2 or 3 pints, because to get back into that mindset and that focus takes a while. But for me, I was like bing, 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 and I could get hyper focused and do these tasks, and suddenly 6 hours later it'd be amazing.
Yeah, and you've got to eat and drink, which isn't great. I don't think that's a good for medication, but I think before you'd have got drawn in and distracted by those other people, and you didn't, but it hasn't made you any less efficient.
No. It's supercharged my strong
points. Definitely not stopped him talking either. I'd say he'd probably talk more now.
Yeah.
Not right now when he's nervous, but when we're with friends.
And one of my main symptoms is oversharing, and I don't have an off button, or have the ability to stop telling people everything about my life,
or the really random details. Right, so town councillor works on the planning committee. Obviously, all our friends live in Stamford as well. He feels the need to tell people, talk to people, not tell people things he shouldn't, but talk to people about what's going on. And we're interested to a point, and then to the point where we'll say to him, "Shut up, Barry, we're not interested anymore," and he'll still keep on talking. That's not gone away, so it doesn't dampen that down in it. It's the inside. And I think for me, that was massively my concern. Before I'd started medication, I tried some herbal medication that I'd listed, it was another podcast was sponsored by, and it really spaced me out. And I remember coaching somebody, and I think it's funny, isn't it, Chris, as coaches, because you think because you have to really, really listen and focus, but I can do that. I can really, really focus on a client, and I see patterns, I literally see patterns of people when they're talking. I can sort of mentally put a pattern together, and then I might write it down and draw circles or whatever. And that ability went when I took these herbal medication. And I was like, oh my God, well, I'm not going to be able to take medication because I can't coach, and it's what I do for a living. I need to still have that brilliant brain. But actually, when I took the prescription medication, and it was a fine balance getting it right. The first few days it was a bit like that, and I was a bit woozy and felt sick, and you're thinking, oh my God, what is this doing to me? But once it settled down, it just like you say, takes away the noise. And if anything, I feel more, because the other thing for me was not just about the coaching. I'm very creative, and I like to do creative, writing and do social media stuff and stuff that needs that creativity. And I was worried that it was going to get rid of that creativity. And what it's actually done is help me free up time to be able to be more creative, because I get stuff done when it needs to get done rather than procrastinating. But it hasn't taken away that creativity. If anything, it's like hyper focus isn't the right word.
The word I was going to use was supercharged it.
Yes, yeah.
Same for me, because my ability to do profit and loss and financial stuff is got better and more efficient, and just bang, you can just see these things pop out of spreadsheets, which I can just look at a profit and loss, and this is quite dull actually for probably most of the listeners, but I can look at a profit and loss now, and things just pop out as patterns, and it's just brilliant. So yes,
and Barry's looking for a new job, so if anybody in operations needs profit and loss looking at things. You can do that. But yeah. So I think with medication, I think it is because do you know what? Because I was before, because they diagnosed me with anxiety like they do most women that have got undiagnosed ADHD. The anxiety meds take more of me away than the ADHD meds ever have. And when I couldn't take my ADHD meds, and I was still taking, because I haven't come off the anxiety meds altogether, I was just like, they actually don't help my anxiety, because now the ADHD meds have gone, the anxiety's back, but I'm on anti-anxiety meds. So I'm actually going through the process now of getting myself off that medication so that I'm only on ADHD medication, because I think all along I've just had antidepressants to track anxious or upset or anything, but I don't feel joy in the same way, and I want to be that supercharged person, not the dampened down person. But it's just like with anything, isn't it? It's all down to personal choice. The other thing I would say is I've tried different medication. We're on a different group of medications because of the other stuff that I'm on, and because they tend to give women different things to men and whatever. If it doesn't work the first time, try something else. I went through the same process when I went on. I'm on HRT for perimenopause. If I'd just gone with the first thing that I was prescribed, I wouldn't, I'd have come off it and just been like, whatever. But I was lucky because I had somebody that had been on the podcast that was a specialist who helped me through that and said, right, try something new, try something different. And eventually we got me onto the right medication. But I think you just hear all these horror stories, don't you? And I think I said this last time, if anything, it validated the diagnosis for me, because other people take amphetamines and they want to go to a nightclub, and me and Barry take amphetamines and we want to get into a spreadsheet.
The slightly for me is that I did the trial and error for 3 or 4 months to get the balance of I'm on 2, so a slow release one in the morning and then a top up in the afternoon to get the levels right. And I was just at that point where, this is good, this is exactly where I want to be. And then the slow release one, Elvans, is completely out of stock everywhere in the country. So it's like, that's frustrating. So I'm now having to do the trial and error again with a quick release drug. So I'm a little bit uppy downy, but I think I'm just about where I need to be now, which is good.
It makes your mouth dry though, doesn't it? Which
really,
you can hear
really
when you're
dehydrated.
some of my water.
And I think there's a point that I was thinking as well, Amy, when you were saying about anxiety meds not being effective. And I wonder if the fact that you have ADHD, you've got a reason to have anxiety, right? It's not there's an actual cause for that. And if that cause is not being addressed, then of course you're going to be anxious.
Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it? Because it's like any of these things, like, what is anxious? Like, it's perceived differently by different people, and I think it's like that. Being scared and being excited are very close feelings. That what I was describing and was being, was diagnosed as, and over the years has been diagnosed as anxiety, was actually, my brain trying to process lots of information at once, getting overwhelmed really easily, all ADHD symptoms. And I'm not, I don't resent anybody for my lack of diagnosis up to this point, because I just think the knowledge hasn't been there. The awareness still isn't there. I do worry for our daughter, because we're still at a stage where we can see traits in her, but school can't, and the schools have all the power when it comes to getting a child diagnosed.
You can't get diagnosis until 7 anyway.
No, she could get one now if we. I don't want to say the word fight, because I don't want to feel like we're having to fight for it. So, but I think things are. We know we're in a massive change, aren't we, in terms of attitudes towards neurodiversity and diagnoses and stuff like that. And I really hope for her that she doesn't have to go through years of being misunderstood before she gets the help that she needs. Well, she won't be, because she's got me and you to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, because I've talked to other people, and there's again, we're going all over the place today. I think there is a hesitation. Yeah. I think there's a hesitation from parents in general to say, why would I want to give my child this label of ADHD? And I personally, I kind of go, because then they can get support and they can understand themselves and they don't feel bad about themselves for the rest of their lives. But I'd be interested to hear, will you tell your daughter that she's got ADHD? And
we already talk about the fact that we've all got special brains. So we don't call it ADHD. We don't, because obviously she's not got a diagnosis, and we don't want her to feel like she's labelled, but she's proud that she's got a special brain. Because, like, that's not giving her a label. We've all got special brains. Like, if you're neurotypical, like, the fact that we've got a brain is special, right? But what I think we're trying to do for her that we didn't get because our parents weren't aware, because it didn't exist, or, you know, whatever, is where she doesn't get that understanding, we give her that understanding. And it's hard, don't get me wrong, because you've got all of the, you know, you've got older generations telling us that we're letting her get away with things, you know, like she really struggles to sit still and eat and all of that sort of stuff. But we pick our battles. Again, battles isn't the right word, but we pick our moments and when we force her to do things because society says it should be done that way, or we encourage how she actually wants to be. But that is hard because we get judged for that. We do get judged for that. Like the meltdown she had in public the other day.
Yeah.
Oh God. So I totally get that label thing. And people have said to me, you know, why have you felt the need to get diagnosed and get a label? I don't care what the label is. I want the help and support. And you know, and I think I talked about last time, you know, when I was at primary school, my best friend got diagnosed with dyslexia, and it was very much a new thing then. It was early 80s. But she got special help. She got extra help.
A friend of mine, when I told her that I'd been diagnosed, she said, well, why do you want to jump on the bandwagon? It's like, well, it's not jumping on the bandwagon, it's understanding myself more and doing something about it.
And I think partly because we're talking about it openly. Like, we're on a podcast now talking about it. It's like, why, like, fine, but why do you feel the need to shout about it? But I mean, for me, I don't know how you feel about this, I think it's important to talk about this stuff because so that people understand it. Even like the last time I came on, Chris, my sister listened to it, and she's not got any. I mean, she isn't ADHD, and she said, I understand it so much better now because I kept saying on the podcast, these are just human traits, but they're like supercharged in me, you know. And I think the more we talk about stuff like this, the more it will educate neurotypicals, people that might have neurodiversity, but it also upsets people.
When I was going through my diagnosis at the early bits with my psychologist, he asked two of the people who knew me as a kid to fill out just a number of questions, 12 questions from in my kind of younger years and teenage years, and I gave it to one of my best mates and I gave it to my mum, who knew me back then, and mum said, well, I didn't notice anything, and my friend was also quite similar. But actually now my mum listened to the episodes that Amy did with you a short while ago, and found it really, really fascinating about, oh yeah, it does explain a lot, doesn't it?
Well, it's funny because your friend, like you said, what was the term that you used, Chris, where we basically attract other people? I'm not saying that he has got ADHD, but, you know, there's...
the neuro huddle.
Yeah, I'd say he's in the neuro huddle, right? And So, and I think that's the thing, because I remember another good friend of ours now, so a couple that we're good friends with that Barry's known for a long time. I can remember the wife taking me to one side when we'd not been together that long and being like, his family are, the family's a bit different, like it's a bit different and whatever, and like they are like different, not being a bad thing, different, just different in a different way. And I think I'm worried now your mum's going to listen to this and be like really offended. I don't mean anything by it, Pat, like that.
But for me growing up, that was normal.
That's
absolutely
the point.
And until I talked about it through with my counsellor 2 or 3 years ago, that made me realise, we were slightly different, but that was our family. It was fine.
But we all think that the family we were brought up in is the norm because that's what we learn, and I think that's why we're getting so many. I sent you a reel, didn't I, of somebody saying, it's. I don't understand why you have to label yourself. We didn't have ADHD back in my day, and then like showing loads of ADHD traits themselves. That's the reality. We're brought up. Your reality is like when we were kids, people with ADHD and autism, they were just the weird kid, and it turns out we were the weird kids.
The naughty kid.
Yeah, I wasn't naughty, but I was disruptive. Maybe.
And I think there's something there for listeners coming out to their family or talking to their family about ADHD or other neurodivergent traits, and when families go, but everyone does that, that's normal, being aware that there is a genetic component to this, and just because it's normal in your family does not mean it is normal across society.
I think that's where my mum struggled a little bit. She this a little bit of RSD maybe, but she thought that if I had it, it was her fault because it was a lack of knowledge. But actually, now she's got a little bit of knowledge. We've talked about it, and then the podcast as well. There's a high level of understanding and maybe compassion from her as well.
Yeah, I think my mum's been exactly the same. Actually, it's that the initial reaction was like, why do you need a label? What is this? How do you diagnose this? Is it really true? And actually then reading more into it, kind of understanding. I think for me, because I had a difficult relationship with my mum in my teenage years, that it explains that now. Like it makes it better because it wasn't, she used to call me a rebel without a cause, and it turns out there was a cause.
But both of our mums are 77 years old, so it's a massive generational gap between now and then. But the fact they do have that level of understanding is great.
Yeah.
And I have heard stories of people getting diagnosed with ADHD in their 70s and saying it's absolutely changed their lives as well. Just in case anyone listening is in their 70s and go, why would I even bother with a diagnosis? Why would I bother with medication? It can
Never
still...
too late.
Yeah.
I think that is because it doesn't mean that you're going to get medicated. It's not going to or do anything. I think for both of us, it's just explained so much about our pasts, hasn't it?
My friend who we talked about briefly earlier, she said, I don't think you've got ADHD. I think you've got autism. She's got 3 neurodiverse children. So a couple of months ago, I went on a webinar for Autism 360, the kind of sister company to ADHD 360, and I did an online test, AJ10 or AQ10, for autism checks, and I scored at a level where I probably have got autism as well. However, autism is something that you can't go down the medication route. It's just dealt with through counselling and learning and that sort of thing,
which you're getting,
which I'm doing anyway. So it's just.
So you made the decision not to get the diagnosis for that, but
so I am where I am. My brain is what it is, and I'm happy with that. So I'll just keep on going down the route I am with seeing my psychologist and taking the medication.
Yeah, I think that there's almost that thing as well of saying, and this is a weird thing to say on an ADHD podcast, of ADHD isn't a real thing. And by that I mean it's a collection of traits that we've grouped together and say they all exist. And these brain structures exist and they cause these different things. And if you've got so many on this spreadsheet that we've got here, and you've got more than 5 on this one and more than 5 on this one, then you're combined. If not, then you're one or the other. I'm saying it is a collection of traits, and just like autism is a collection of traits that we've said that together is autism, that together is ADHD, and it's an arbitrary line.
Yeah, but I guess it's the spectrum thing, isn't it? And I would say, since Barry's been medicated, those other traits probably have come to the forefront a little bit more. But that's fine. Like,
I've always had there's little things up. He's
going to start oversharing now. I'm like, shut him up.
I've always had a weird fascination with the number 4, shuffling steps and counting in my head and that sort of thing, which I've had for 40 plus years, and for me that was normal. But actually, it's my friends have always said, well, if anyone is, you're the one on the spectrum. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. That was one of the red flags that I was talking about. It wasn't that bad. I can remember when him telling me he had this obsession with the number 4, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. But we've both become, I think, through the diagnosis process, through the last few years, we've both become so much more tolerant of each other. But I think we've also become less judgmental of other people as well. You were right judgy one before.
Yeah, when at the beginning of COVID 3 years ago, when everybody was...
He was one of those window twitchers.
I'm going to tell them, then tell them proper judgmental. But now I'm just so much calmer, and you know what? What will be, isn't it? So
I'm so glad that we have flown through today's episode. We've got a little bit of time left. I just want to ask you, like, having a happy neurodivergent household, what are the tips that you would give to other people? And Amy, I'll come to you first and then I'll come to Barry.
I think that open communication about the differences is so important. I think that's what's kept us going through the tough times that we've had, is talking to each other and learning to do that in a way that doesn't get each other's backs and up and then RSD like flying at 1 million miles an hour. And the other one I would say is the flipping whiteboard. It sounds ridiculous, but accepting that we have to, even though we don't I don't particularly like structure. Well, I do. I don't like things to change, but I like to be creative and do what I want to do. I think my point is, when your life becomes more complex, and I think this is why more and more people are getting diagnosed in midlife, when you've got like 1 million responsibilities, putting systems in place. And I'm really hesitant to say this, because it's like the worst thing you can say to somebody with ADHD is write a list. Like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Find what your equivalent of a list is. So ours is the whiteboard, and I have an app on my phone as well. And it took us a few years to like work out that sending meeting requests to each other in each other's work diary was going to work. So it's like having the conversations and the compassion for one another, and having systems in place that help.
We have just had the annoyance. Obviously, I've just left my job a couple of weeks ago, and all the meeting requests were sent between each other's work emails.
Yeah, maybe we should have done it in our personal emails.
So yeah, I've got to go through and check that everything's where it should be. And
you think it's annoying? I find it quite annoying when I get the meeting, like 600 rugby meeting requests through. So what's your take then?
Well, I'd double down on the communication thing. Our relationship has been strongest when we talk to each other. It's been the weakest when I stopped talking to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I never stop talking, but when you withdraw, and that's when my spidey senses start going, the 5% is more than 5%.
And processes, for me personally, process and structure and routine is something that keeps me normal. I'm allowed to say that on this podcast.
Say what you want.
And I think also that am I allowed to add another one, Chris?
Of course.
You're going to anyway. So
I don't know why I mentioned. I think from the outside, people would be like, don't really don't necessarily get us as a couple. But we almost have we now have this united understanding of each other. Like we are, we're a family unit of 3. We've got I've got a massive family, and you've got your mum and a couple of cousins, but it's all, like you said, we've doubled down on communication. I think we have done, since we've got the diagnosis, I think we have got more respect for each other and for our daughter, and the difficulties that we all have, and actually having that compassion for each other, I think is the thing that's really helping us at the moment. But I think we know that it's never going to be easy.
No. But we've put in a lot of work, haven't we? Yeah. And I think that's a big thing with any relationship, whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse. You've got to put in the work. You've got to keep talking to each other. Communication is work for me. It was always, that was my number one thing. Just talk to people. Just pick up the phone. Just communicate. And that is so important.
But it's easy for that to go by the wayside, and it's definitely gone by the wayside for us, particularly when we're particularly busy and you're running from one after school club to another. To actually communicate. So even like Barry's not been at work for the last couple of weeks, we've just had that tight, like even if it's like half an hour more together a day, that has brought us closer, because we just didn't have that before, because we just didn't have the time. So I think that there's something in that as well.
Yeah, it's the hamster wheel, isn't it? It's just constantly running to stand still.
Yeah. That wasn't a very succinct answer, but you weren't expecting that.
Absolutely not. I do want to just say, like, on the guidance and structure thing as well, I think I find that very useful, because I can say these are the boundaries, and then I can play within those boundaries as well. I was saying, like, this is what I need on either side of it, and then all of that space is open to interpretation and playing around with as well. So it's not as restrictive as you have to do this. Okay, well, this is what I need. This is where I'm going to be in danger. This is where I'm going to have to watch out for myself, and this is where I'm going to have fun. So let's try and keep and have as much fun as possible.
Yeah.
I think there's a level of acceptance between us as well, because I would love Amy to put her shoes in the shoe rack and not leave them all over the house and take stuff upstairs. All these things.
Oh, you don't take stuff upstairs.
Okay, but I kind of accept that it's not going to change. So I could moan about it, but all I do is just pick them up and put them away myself.
But do you know what? It's a really good point, because like we've both said, we're divorced. In my previous house was immaculate, because my husband didn't like mess, and he would get really moody about it and whatever. But we were both miserable.
Do I have to get moody for you to change?
Don't. And that's the difference, isn't it? It's like accepting the messiness, whether the mess is physical mess or the messiness of each other's brains, versus the relationships we have been in previously, where it's like, it's got to be that way. I don't care about the upstairs of our house, because people don't see that, but I'd love the downstairs of our house to be tidy when people came around. It just doesn't happen. Like, I just can't do it. And well, I can, but it makes me miserable, and I was miserable in my marriage, and I'm not miserable now. So there you go.
The two of the first things I did last week in my first week off work was sort out all the cables behind the TV and sort out the understairs cupboard. Two things that people can't see, so it really annoyed Amy.
It really annoyed me. I just went, I was like, that. And obviously I get home and he's like, you've got to show you this, and I'm like, I've worked my arse off today, and you've just pulled everything out of a cupboard. Well done, you.
When she got home, everything was all
it was all still out of the cupboard, obviously, because you get bored halfway through, don't you? But he's like, and everything's in this, and I just went, right, okay, next week, can you work on the actual disorganisation and mess that people can see, please? Because that's what matters.
And then sorting out the cables, I've got all the stuff to do it, and I thought, well, I'll do that tomorrow. Except at 10:15 at night, I decided, I've got to do that now.
Have to do it now.
Of course.
12:30 sorting out all those cables.
But it was so satisfying once it was done, right?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Loved it.
Yeah.
Took a photo, sent it to Amy, so she woke up to it. Brilliant.
And I was really excited, as you can imagine.
Wonderful.
And oh God, that was going to sound dodgy. I was going to say the photos you used to send me when we first got together. They weren't dodgy. They were like, oh. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now.
Wonderful. I think we'll call it there before we go into anything more dodgy. I know you said it last time, but Amy, how can people get hold of you? And Barry, if you want people to kind of reach out to you as well, do feel free to share.
I'm LinkedIn queen. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I'm getting him on LinkedIn all the time as well at the minute.
Yeah, so my LinkedIn profile is the most public forum, so it's got all my contact details on there. Just find me with my name.
Brilliant. Thank you both.
I should say that, didn't I?
Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Drew.
And that is it for today's episode of This is ADHD. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation with Amy and Barry. I love that all three of us overlap and differ with our ADHD and autism traits. Really is an interesting conversation when you go, oh, I do that, but you don't do that, and oh, you do that, but I don't do that. And it just goes to show, as per the point of this podcast, that ADHD is not just one thing. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and Threads at This is ADHD Podcast. This is where you'll find updates, polls, and opportunities to engage with fellow listeners. And if you want to follow me personally, you can find me same places at the Coaching Blacksmith. Reach out if you have any suggestions for future episodes or guests. I really love hearing from you, and the feedback really does make this all worthwhile. If you want even more talk about ADHD or want to support the running costs of the podcast, I now have a Substack. You can find and subscribe at thecoachingblacksmith.substack.com. As always, thank you for joining us today. I hope this episode was interesting and useful.